He had not spoken a single word in 2 years, not to his lawyer, not to a guard, not to anyone. Then on a Tuesday morning, a prison guard brought his 3-year-old daughter to work. She walked up to his cell, crouched down, and pushed a small teddy bear through the cold metal bars. And the silent man, the vanished billionaire, did something nobody had seen in 730 days. He looked up. His name was Michael Thorne. 2 years ago, he was the billionaire founder of Viridian Systems, convicted of orchestrating one of the largest corporate frauds in a decade. Now he was inmate 4728, a ghost in the system. This is the story of how a man who stole from thousands was reached by the only person who wanted nothing from him at all. And it begins with the one rule everyone in that prison knew. Do not engage the silent man in cell block C. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a presence. It filled cell block C like a cold, dense fog. For 730 days, Michael Thorne had maintained a vow of silence so complete it had baffled psychiatrists, frustrated wardens, and become a grim legend among the inmates. He moved through the routines of incarceration like a sleepwalker. Meals were taken from the tray slot without a glance. The 1-hour yard privilege was spent standing perfectly still in the same corner, face tilted toward the sky, rain or shine. He responded to direct orders with slow, mechanical compliance, but never with a word. Not one. The official diagnosis after 6 months of evaluation was severe depressive catatonia, a psychological shutdown. The man who had once commanded boardrooms of 50 people, who had given keynote speeches to thousands, had simply turned himself off. The prison's chief psychiatrist, Dr. Aris, had filed a report noting that inmate Thorne represented a unique clinical challenge. He was physically healthy but psychically absent. Medications for depression were administered but showed no measurable effect on his mutism. He was, in the dry language of the institution, a compliant but non-communicative resident. But the guards on Block C had their own diagnosis. They called it the billionaire's boycott, a final act of arrogant control from a man who had lost control of everything else. Officer Marcus Vance saw it differently. He'd been assigned to the block for 8 months, and in that time he'd developed a quiet theory. Thorne wasn't trying to control anything. He was hiding. The man's eyes, when you caught them by accident, held none of the defiance you'd expect from a protest. They held a hollowed-out shame so deep it looked like fear. Marcus knew what that looked like. He'd seen it in the mirror after his wife left, before he'd figured out how to be a single father to his 3-year-old daughter, Chloe. Marcus's life was a study in precision, a stark contrast to the chaotic silence of cell 4728. His alarm buzzed at 4:15 a.m. every morning. He had 45 minutes to get himself ready before he had to wake Chloe. He'd make her lunch, a sandwich cut into stars with a cookie cutter she loved, and lay out her clothes. He'd then shower, shave, put on the pressed gray uniform of a corrections officer, and then at exactly 5:05 he'd gently shake her awake. "Sun's up, bug," he'd whisper. Their 2-bedroom apartment was small, the walls thin, but it was theirs. The silence there was different. It was the quiet of peace, of a child sleeping, not the silence of a man disintegrating. The prison administration had a laminated sheet of protocols for inmate Thorne, much like the rules for Ashford Crane's study. Do not attempt to force conversation. Do not interpret his silence as noncompliance unless he refuses a direct order. Report any change in physical behavior immediately. The turnover on Block C wasn't as high as the caregiver turnover in the estate, but there was a pattern. New guards, the gung-ho types, would try to break the ice. They'd make a joke, ask a question about the weather, try to provoke a reaction. They'd get nothing, not a flicker. Most gave up after a few weeks, finding the duty unnerving and requested transfer. Marcus never tried. He did his rounds, delivered the tray, gave a firm, professional nod, and moved on. He understood the desire to be left alone. Michael Thorne's past was a ghost that haunted the present. Before the fall, Viridian Systems was a darling of the tech world, a data analytics firm valued at $9.4 billion. Thorne wasn't just the CEO. He was the visionary, the charismatic face on magazine covers, the man who promised to make data human. The fraud was devastating in its simplicity. For 3 years, he had authorized the fabrication of contracts and revenue streams, a digital Potemkin village that inflated the company's value by over $2 billion. When it collapsed, it wasn't just banks that lost money. It was the pension funds of teachers, the retirement savings of thousands of ordinary investors. At his sentencing, the judge had called it a betrayal of trust so profound it shakes the foundations of the marketplace. Thorne was given 22 years. He made his one and only public statement then, turning to the courtroom gallery filled with victims. "I have no excuse," he said, his voice barely audible. "I am sorry." They were the last words anyone would hear him speak for 2 years. Inside, the silence began immediately. His high-profile status meant initial isolation for his own protection, but when he was moved to general population, the quiet went with him. He became a museum piece of his own disgrace. The other inmates largely left him alone, less out of respect and more out of superstition. There was something unsettling about a man who wouldn't even curse you out. His world shrank to an 8x10 cell, a stainless steel toilet, and a view of a concrete wall through reinforced wire glass. Marcus's world, meanwhile, was on the verge of a scheduling crisis. It was a Tuesday in early April. His usual sitter, Mrs. Ellis, had called the night before. Her sister had fallen ill. She had to go to Chicago. She'd be gone for a week. Marcus had no family in the state. Calling out of work was not an option. He was barely ahead of the bills as it was. The spring in his sofa, the one that dug into his side, was a monthly reminder. Then he saw the memo on the staff bulletin board. Annual Bring Your Child to Work Day. Thursday, April 11th. All staff children welcome for tour and activities in the staff lounge. Please register with administration. He stood there staring at the flyer with its cartoon drawing of a smiling badge. It was against every instinct he had as a father. This was not a place for a child, but it was also, the more he thought about it, the only option he had. He could keep her in the staff lounge all day, away from the cells, away from the blocks. He filled out the form with a tight feeling in his chest. The day dawned gray and drizzly. Chloe was buzzing with excitement, wearing her favorite dress, the bright pink one with white polka dots. She clutched her worn teddy bear, a brown bear named Boo she'd had since she was a baby. "We see your work, Daddy," she asked for the 10th time. "Yes, Bug," Marcus said, knotting his tie. "But you have to stay where I tell you, okay? It's a very serious place." She nodded with a solemnity that almost broke his heart. At the prison, the atmosphere was oddly festive in the secured staff areas. There were 15 other kids, mostly older, coloring at tables, eating snacks. Marcus settled Chloe in a corner with some crayons. "I have to do my first round, Bug. I'll be back in 20 minutes. Officer Jenkins right here will watch you." Chloe looked up, her big eyes serious. "Okay, Daddy. Boo will guard me." Marcus forced a smile and left, the unease in his gut growing. His first round was on Block C. The usual silence greeted him. The hum of fluorescence, the distant clang of another gate. He moved down the row, checking doors. As he passed cell 4728, he saw Thorne. He was sitting on his cot in the same position he always was, elbows on knees, head bowed, staring at the floor between his feet. He didn't look up. Marcus completed the check and turned to leave. And that's when he heard it, the distinct, shuffling patter of small, quick feet. And a voice, bright as a bell, echoing in the concrete hall. "Daddy." Boo was scared of the noise. Marcus's blood went cold. He spun around. Chloe stood at the entrance to the block, peering down the long hallway, having slipped past a distracted Officer Jenkins. Before he could move, before he could shout, she saw him and started running toward him. But her eyes, curious and wide, were already scanning the strange doors with their metal bars. She stopped halfway, right outside cell 4728. She tilted her head. She saw the man inside. Without a trace of fear, without any of the apprehension that gripped every adult who approached that cell, she crouched down. She pushed her teddy bear, Boo, through the narrow gap at the bottom of the bars, where the food tray usually slid. The bear's paw flopped onto the gray cell floor. "Here," she said, her voice clear in the absolute quiet. "Boo can sit with you. He's not scared." And Michael Thorne, the silent man, the ghost of Block C, slowly raised his head. For a breath that lasted an eternity, the only sound was the hum of the lights. Michael Thorne's eyes, hollow and distant for so long, were now fixed on the small, worn bear lying on the concrete floor of his cell. They flicked up to the child's face, scrunched with concern outside the bars, then back down to the toy. Marcus Vance stood frozen, his hand halfway out, every protocol screaming in his head, but his father's heart beating louder. Thorne's hand, which had been resting limply on his knee, twitched. Then, with a slowness that seemed to draw all the air from the hallway, he uncurled his fingers. He leaned forward just a few inches and picked up the teddy bear. He held it in both hands, looking at its stitched eyes and missing patch of fur on one ear. His throat moved. A dry, unused click. And then a voice so rusty and soft it was barely more than a scrape of air, a sound that seemed to surprise even him, formed a single word. "Boo." It wasn't a question for the child. It was a recognition, a nomming. Chloe's face broke into a radiant smile. "Yeah, Boo, he's nice." She beamed at her father, who was still statue still. "See, Daddy, he's not scared now." The spell shattered. Marcus lunged forward, scooping Chloe into his arms. "I am so sorry, Bug, you cannot be here," he whispered, his voice tight with a cocktail of panic and awe. He turned, carrying her swiftly out of the block, her head peeking over his shoulder, waving at the man in the cell. Thorne did not wave back. He just sat, holding the bear, staring at the space where she had been. The incident report Marcus filed was a masterpiece of minimalism. Inmate 4728 exhibited a break in established behavioral pattern by engaging with an unauthorized object. No threat was presented. The object, a child's toy, was retrieved and returned. He said nothing about the spoken word. He told himself it was too quiet, too ambiguous. He told himself he might have imagined it, but he knew he hadn't. He'd heard it. The silent man had spoken. The next morning, the silence in cell block C had a different quality. It felt watchful. Thorne was in his usual position, but the teddy bear was not with him. Marcus assumed it had been confiscated overnight by the shift captain. He completed his rounds, his professional mask firmly in place. As he passed Thorne's cell, he gave the standard nod. And then, just as he was about to turn the corner, he heard it again. That dry, quiet voice. "Officer." Marcus stopped. He turned slowly. Thorne was looking at him, not through him. His eyes were clearer, present in a way they hadn't been in 2 years. "The bear," Thorne said, each word an effort. "Is it with the child?" Marcus's training warred with a strange, unwelcome surge of empathy. "It's been logged into property storage, inmate. It will be returned to its owner." Thorne absorbed this. He gave a single, shallow nod, and his gaze returned to the floor. The conversation, such as it was over. But a line had been crossed. A boundary had dissolved. Within 48 hours, the prison administration was a hive of low-grade panic. The shift captain had reviewed the block's audio logs. The single word "boo" was there, faint but undeniable. The chief psychiatrist, Dr. Aris, was summoned. Warden Cole, a stern man who ran his facility by the book and saw anomalies as potential security risks, convened a meeting. Marcus was called in. "You understand the severity of the breach, Officer Vance," Warden Cole began, his fingers steepled on his desk. "An unauthorized minor in a maximum security block, contraband introduced into a cell. This is a terminable offense." Marcus kept his eyes forward. "Yes, sir. It was a failure of supervision in the staff lounge. I take full responsibility." Dr. Aris, a woman in her 50s with calm, observant eyes, cut in. "Termination is one matter, Warden. The clinical matter is another. Inmate Thorne has been catatonic for 24 months. He has now spoken twice. However minor the interaction, it represents a seismic shift. We need to understand what triggered it." "The child," Marcus said, the words out before he could stop them. Both sets of eyes turned to him. He cleared his throat. "The inmate engaged with my daughter, sir. She offered him her toy. He responded." A toddler, Dr. Aris said, more to herself than to them. Non-threatening, no agenda, pure, simple empathy. She turned to the warden. We have a unique and volatile situation. We could medicate him back into silence, or we could have, for lack of a better term, a key. A key to what? Warden Cole asked, skepticism dripping from his voice. To whatever locked him away in the first place, she replied. And if we have that, we might have a compliant, communicative inmate, or we might have a man starting a performance to gain some advantage. We need to know which. A tense compromise was reached. Marcus received a formal written warning, suspended from patrol duty for 1 week, and was reassigned to desk duty in the records room. But Dr. Aris proposed, and after significant debate, the warden begrudgingly approved a controlled experiment. Under strict observed conditions, the teddy bear would be returned to inmate Thorne's cell. His reactions would be monitored. No child would be involved. This was about the object, not the girl. The bear was placed on his cot the next afternoon by a guard who said nothing. From the observation room, Dr. Aris and a skeptical deputy warden watched on a monitor. Thorne stared at the bear for a full 10 minutes. Then he picked it up. He didn't speak, but he did something he had never been observed doing before. He rearranged his few allotted possessions. He placed the bear sitting upright against his thin pillow, positioning it carefully so it faced the cell door. It was a gesture of order, of care. It was devastating. It's not about the toy, Dr. Aris whispered to the deputy warden. It's about the connection it represents. It's a totem. He's holding onto a thread. The thread, however, was about to be pulled from the other end. News in a prison travels through the walls. The story of the silent billionaire who spoke to a guard's kid was too juicy, too strange not to leak. A corrections officer with a side gig blogging about life inside mentioned it in vague terms. A local crime reporter, always sniffing around the prison, caught the scent. Within a week, the story was out. Fallen tycoon BREAK's silence after toddler's visit. The article was speculative, light on facts, but heavy on emotional implication. It painted a picture of a hardened fraudster softened by innocent grace. The reaction from the world outside was swift and brutal. The victims of Thorne's fraud, many still struggling financially, saw red. How dare this man receive sympathy? How dare a child's kindness be weaponized to make him seem human? A group of them, organized by a retired teacher who had lost her life savings, demanded a meeting with the warden. They wanted assurances Thorne was receiving no special treatment. They wanted the narrative shut down. Warden Cole, now facing pressure from both inside and outside his walls, summoned Dr. Aris again. The experiment is over. The bear goes back to property. No more triggers. We're feeding a media circus and reopening wounds for his victims. He stays in Gen Pop, no contact, as per standard protocol. Dr. Aris argued, citing therapeutic duty. She was overruled. The order went out. The bear was removed from Thorne's cell during an evening count. When Marcus heard about it on his first day back to limited duty, a cold dread settled in his stomach. He wasn't sure why he cared, but he did. He'd seen the change, however small. He'd heard the man ask about the child's well-being. The next morning, Marcus was assigned a paperwork run that took him past the infirmary. He saw Dr. Aris leaving a treatment room, her face drawn. "Inmate Thorne?" Marcus asked quietly, stepping alongside her. She sighed. Refused breakfast, refused his hypertension medication. He's back on his cot, staring at the wall. Not catatonic, not yet, but withdrawing. It's a regression. The warden sees it as a reversion to a stable, manageable state. I see it as a door slamming shut. Marcus thought of Chloe, of how she asked about the quiet man every night now. He thought of the stark, unforgiving silence of his own life before her. He made a decision that would cost him his career if discovered. On his lunch break, he went to property storage. Using his still valid credentials, he signed out one item, one child's toy, brown bear, logged as evidence from Incident Report 14-7. He didn't take it home. He couldn't. That afternoon, during the post-lunch lockup, Marcus walked his old round on Block C. The hall was quiet. As he passed cell 4728, he didn't break stride, but from his pocket he slipped a small, folded square of paper through the bars. It fluttered to the floor just inside the cell. It was a crayon drawing Chloe had made that morning. Two stick figures, one large in gray, one small in pink, holding hands. A lopsided brown circle sat at their feet. At the top, in his own handwriting because she couldn't spell it yet, were the words, "Boo is okay." He kept walking, heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. From the cell behind him, after a minute of silence, came a sound he would never forget. It was low, choked, and utterly human. It was the sound of a man, 2 years gone from himself, beginning to cry. The sound of Michael Thorne weeping did not stay contained in cell block C. It traveled through the concrete like a seismic tremor, reaching ears it was never meant to reach. And it set off a chain reaction that would pit the prison's need for control against a force it could not regulate. A conscience, once lost, now painfully rediscovered. An inmate in the adjacent cell, a man named Rico serving 10 for armed robbery, heard the muffled sobs. In the economy of prison, information is currency. Rico had a cousin who worked in the prison laundry who had a friend in the admin office. Within 24 hours, the rumor was everywhere. The silent billionaire was crying over a kid's drawing. The guards knew it. The kitchen staff knew it. And most dangerously, the victims' advocacy group had a sympathetic contact on the inside who passed the information along. Their response was a fury of organized pressure. Letters flooded the warden's office. Angry op-eds were published. "Why is a convicted thief of thousands being coddled with art therapy?" one read. "His tears are 2 years too late and worth less than the paper they're cried on," said another. The retired teacher leading the group, Alina Shaw, secured a televised interview. "Michael Thorne stole security from the elderly and futures from the young," she said, her voice steady but her eyes blazing. "This narrative of redemption is an insult. Let him serve his sentence in the silence his crimes deserve." Inside the walls, Warden Cole's patience snapped. He called Marcus into his office, the crayon drawing now sealed in a clear evidence bag on the desk between them. "This is contraband, Vance. This is a direct violation of a direct order. This is your career on this desk. Explain to me why I shouldn't terminate you right now and press charges for smuggling." Marcus felt the floor tilt. He thought of Chloe, of their apartment, of the spring in the sofa. He straightened his back. "Sir, it was a piece of paper. It triggered a documented emotional response in a catatonic inmate. Dr. Aris can verify the clinical significance." "Dr. Aris," the warden said coldly, "is no longer assigned to this case. Her clinical significance has created a public relations nightmare. You have one thing working for you, Vance. The inmate has asked to see you." The words hung in the air. Marcus blinked. He asked. "Formally, submitted a written request to the block captain this morning, his first written communication since intake." The warden slid the request form across the desk. The handwriting was shaky, the letters childlike in their effort, but the message was clear. "Request meeting with Officer Marcus Vance. Personal matter." "I want to know what he wants," the warden said. "You will meet him in the visitation room with a glass partition. You will wear a wire. You will find out if this is genuine progress or the start of a manipulation. You do this and we will discuss your job. You refuse and you are fired. Do you understand?" It was not a choice. It was a trap, and Marcus walked right into it. The visitation room was stark, divided by a thick plexiglass wall with a perforated speaker. Thorne was already seated, wearing his orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed to a ring on the table. He looked thinner, older, but his eyes were alert. They tracked Marcus as he sat down. A guard stood in the corner, another watched from the observation booth. The wire was a faint itch under Marcus's shirt. For a full minute, they just looked at each other through the glass. Thorne spoke first, his voice still rough but stronger. "The drawing, your daughter, Chloe." He said her name carefully, like it was a fragile thing. "Yes," Marcus said, his voice flat, professional. "Thank you," Thorne said. Then he looked down at his cuffed hands. I need to ask you for something impossible." Here it comes, Marcus thought. The ask, the favor, the manipulation. What is it? Thorne took a deep breath as if steeling himself. I want to write a letter to the people I hurt, the ones in the group, Elena Shaw's group. Marcus stared. This was not what he expected. Not a request for a book, a special meal, a phone call, a letter to his victims. You can write to anyone you want, inmate. You have male privileges. Thorne shook his head, a sharp, frustrated motion. No, not like that. Not a prison mail letter they can ignore or throw away. Oh, a statement to be read at their next meeting. I want them to hear it. I need them to hear it. Marcus's mind raced. This was a landmine. Why? He asked, the wire feeling like a snake against his skin. Thorne's eyes filled with a raw, unvarnished pain. Because for 2 years I told myself I was being punished, that the silence was my sentence. But your daughter, she didn't see a punishment. She saw a sad man, and she was right. His voice cracked. The punishment wasn't the silence was the hiding place. The real punishment is knowing what I did. It's remembering their faces in that courtroom every single day. I need to say it to them, not to a judge, to them. The raw honesty in the words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He believed him, and that belief was more dangerous than any lie. I can't deliver that, Marcus said, his mouth dry. It's not protocol. It could be seen as harassment. The warden would never allow it. Then ask him, Thorne pleaded, leaning forward as far as the cuffs would allow. Ask him to let me do this one thing, not for me, for them. The meeting ended. Marcus's debrief with the warden and the deputy warden was tense. He played the audio from the wire. The request hung in the air of the office. It's a ploy, the deputy warden said immediately. He's crafting a narrative for a parole hearing 5 years from now, showing remorse, rehabilitation. It's calculated. Warden Cole rubbed his temples. Calculated or not, if we say no and it gets out we denied a remorseful inmate a chance to apologize to his victims, we look worse. The media will have a field day. He looked at Marcus. What's your read, Vance? You were in the room. Marcus chose his words with the care of a bomb technician. Sir, I believe his remorse is genuine. I also believe delivering any communication from him to that specific group is a powder keg. But if he's willing to put words to his guilt in a controlled setting, it might drain some of the poison from this situation. A grim, risky plan was formed. Thorne would be allowed to write a statement. It would be reviewed by the warden, by legal, and by the prison chaplain. If approved, it would not be delivered by Marcus and no child would be involved. The warden himself would contact Elena Shaw and offer her the choice to receive it. She would have full power to accept it, read it to her group, or burn it unread. The process would be documented, sterile, and quiet. Thorne wrote for 3 days. He filled legal pad after legal pad, his handwriting evolving from a shaky scrawl to a determined, dense script. The pages were collected each night. The warden, the deputy, and the prison's lawyer pored over them. They contained no excuses, no appeals for sympathy. They contained a cold, meticulous dissection of his own arrogance, a name-by-name accounting of the financial mechanisms of the fraud, and direct, unflinching apologies to the types of people he'd harmed. The retiree, the single parent, the small business owner. It was brutal in its self-flagellation. Elena Shaw, after a week of deliberation, agreed to receive the statement, but she had conditions. She would not come to the prison. It would be mailed to her P.O. box. She would read it alone first. She made no promises. The day the envelope left the prison mailroom felt like the eye of a hurricane. The strange calm was shattered 48 hours later when Elena Shaw called the warden's office directly. Her voice, recorded on the speakerphone with the deputy warden present, was not what anyone expected. It was not angry, it was shaken. I read it, she said. My group meets tomorrow night. I will read it to them, but I need to know, is this man receiving any psychological care? The question blindsided them. The warden, cautious, replied that the inmate had access to standard prison mental health services. It's not enough, Alina Shaw said, and the conviction in her voice was absolute. What is in these pages? This is not a man trying to con us. This is a man drowning in what he's done. You have a responsibility to address that. We will discuss his words tomorrow, but you have a responsibility to the human being in your care. She hung up. The deputy warden looked stunned. Did she just advocate for him? The ground had shifted beneath their feet. The victims were no longer a monolithic wall of rage. A crack had appeared. But just as this fragile new dynamic formed, the institutional machinery reacted. The prison officers' union got wind of Marcus's special involvement, the wired meeting, the drawing. They filed a grievance. Officer Vance was being used outside his security purview, placed in an emotionally manipulative situation with a high-profile inmate, creating a safety risk. They demanded he be removed from any contact with inmate Thorne immediately. Simultaneously, a national news magazine, digging deeper than the local paper, was preparing a feature. They had interviewed former Veridian employees, cellmates, and were trying to track down Chloe's mother for a comment. The story was morphing from a quirky human interest piece into a deep examination of guilt, punishment, and the unexpected paths of remorse. Marcus, suspended pending the union grievance, sat in his quiet apartment. Chloe was at a temporary sitter's, paid for with money he didn't have. The silence he once cherished now felt like a void. He looked at a photo of Chloe, her bright smile, and then at his uniform hanging in the closet. He had followed the rules, then broken them, then been used by them. He thought of Thorne's words, the unbearable weight of them. He thought of Alina Shaw's unexpected mercy. And he realized the most dangerous thing had already happened. He could no longer see Michael Thorne as just an inmate. He saw a broken man, and in a system built on not seeing that, such clarity was a liability. He received a call from an unknown number. It was the magazine reporter. "Officer Vance, we're running the story this weekend. We have a quote from a source inside saying you passed the drawing that started all this. We're calling it the Teddy Bear Protocol. Do you have any comment?" Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. The story was about to explode and he was at the center. He had a choice: to hide behind protocol and let the narrative be written for him, or to step into the storm and define it. He thought of Thorne waiting in his cell, unaware that the letter he wrote had set a different kind of trap. He thought of Chloe, who had started it all with a simple act of kindness. And he knew the silence was over for everyone. The only question left was what would fill the space it left behind. The story broke on a Sunday morning. The magazine cover featured a digitally altered image, a stark gray prison bar with a single bright pink polka dot caught on the cold steel. The headline read, "The Teddy Bear Protocol: How a Toddler's Toy Broke a Billionaire's Silence and Exposed a Prison's Crisis of Conscience." Inside, the article named names: Marcus Vance, Michael Thorne, Alina Shaw. It framed the events not as a heartwarming tale, but as a damning indictment of a system that punished humanity as a security risk. In his apartment, Marcus read the article online, his stomach in knots. It was accurate, which was worse. It detailed his suspension, the union grievance, the warden's cold pragmatism. It painted him as a flawed but decent man caught in the gears. The phone began to ring. Old friends, distant family, reporters. He turned it off. At the prison, the reaction was a lockdown of a different kind. The warden's office went into full damage control, issuing a statement that all protocols were followed to ensure safety and security. But the genie was out of the bottle. The article had done the one thing the warden feared most. It made the internal conflict public, and in doing so, it created a constituency for change. That Tuesday night, Alina Shaw's victims group met in a church basement. 23 people gathered, their faces etched with 2 years of bitterness. Alina stood at the front, holding Thorne's letter. She did not mince words. "I have here a statement from Michael Thorne. I've read it. It is an apology. It is specific, it is unsparing, and it offers no excuses. I am going to read it to you now. Then we will discuss." She read the entire document aloud. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. She read his descriptions of the fake revenue streams, the lies to auditors, the moment he knew the house of cards would fall and chose to prop it up for one more quarter. She read the names of the types of people he'd pictured when he signed the falsified reports: the retired machinist, the college fund, the family restaurant. And she read the apologies, each one direct and devoid of self-pity. When she finished, the silence lasted a full minute. Then, a man in the back who had lost his small printing business spoke, his voice thick. He remembers. He actually remembers what he did. Another woman who had been crying quietly said, "It doesn't bring the money back." "No," Alina agreed, setting the pages down. "It doesn't, but it's not nothing. And it changes the question. The question is no longer, is he sorry? The question now is, what do we do with that?" The group debated for 2 hours. Anger flared, then subsided into a weary, complicated grief. They did not forgive him, but a consensus emerged. They did not want his suffering to be the point. They wanted his competence put to use. In a move that shocked the legal community, the group, through Alina, drafted a formal request to the state parole board and the warden. They did not ask for early release. They asked for Michael Thorne to be enrolled in a restorative justice program, and for his analytical skills to be used to advise a new state fraud prevention task force, with any compensation going into a victim restitution fund that was still millions short. "He stole with his mind," Alina said in a subsequent press conference. "Let him repay with it. Keeping him in a silent box helps no one. Making him use his knowledge to stop the next Thorne, that might." The request went viral. It was a narrative twist no novelist would dare invent, the victims advocating for their villain's productive use. The pressure on the prison administration became immense. The union quietly dropped its grievance against Marcus, recognizing the shifting winds. The warden, a pragmatic man to his core, saw a path out of the scandal. Marcus was reinstated, but not to Block C. He was offered a promotion to a training coordinator role, developing new protocols for dealing with inmates experiencing severe psychological distress. It was a good job, a desk job, with better hours. He took it, for Chloe. And Michael Thorne, he was moved to a different, lower security wing. The order for his psychological care was not just reinstated, it was prioritized. Dr. Aris was reassigned to his case. Their sessions were not easy. Thorne had spent 2 years building a fortress of silence. Dismantling it, brick by painful brick, was brutal work. He spoke of his late wife, Claire, who had died of cancer a year before the fraud began. He spoke of the gaping emptiness her death left, and how the adrenaline of the fraud, the game of it, had been the only thing that made him feel anything at all. It was not an excuse. It was an explanation, and he loathed it because it felt like one. He also began the restorative justice work. Under heavy guard and strict supervision, he met with financial regulators. He dissected his own fraud, explaining the loopholes he'd exploited, the warning signs he'd learned to hide. He was chillingly good at it. The restitution fund received its first voluntary deposit from a new state program he'd helped design. Marcus saw him once, months later, across the prison yard. Thorne was in a small group, walking a measured loop, speaking to the inmate beside him. He looked thinner, older, but his head was up. Their eyes met. Thorne gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Marcus returned it. No words were needed. The bridge between them, built by a child and a teddy bear, had been crossed and was now receding into the past where it belonged. The final surprise came not from Thorne, but from the system itself. The teddy bear protocol, as the magazine had dubbed it, became a case study, not in security breaches, but in the cost of treating human disconnection as a management problem. The prison implemented a new policy. For inmates in prolonged states of psychological withdrawal, approved, supervised non-contact visits with therapy animals were introduced. The first animal was a retired greyhound, gentle and quiet. The second was a calm Labrador. There was no more talk of stuffed toys, but everyone knew where the idea had started. On a bright Saturday in October, Marcus took Chloe to the zoo. She was holding his hand, chattering about monkeys. As they passed a bench, he saw an older woman sitting alone reading a newspaper. It was Alina Shaw. She looked up, recognized him from the newspaper photos, and gave a small, weary smile. He nodded back. Two different worlds orbiting the same dark star, now passing in the peaceful silence of a sunny day. No one spoke. Nothing needed to be said. The story of Michael Thorne did not end with a commuted sentence or a miraculous healing. It ended with a man, once defined by his silence, now defined by the difficult daily work of his own accountability. It ended with a guard who learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is see the person behind the prisoner. And it began, as so many real stories do, with a simple, uncalculating act of kindness from the smallest person in the room, who reminded them all that before we are inmates or officers or victims, we are human beings, capable of breaking and capable, against all odds, of beginning slowly to mend. So what do we do with a story like this? A story that doesn't end with a clear villain or a perfect hero, but with the messy, complicated reality of people trying to find their way back to themselves and to each other. We remember that the most profound changes often don't begin with grand gestures or official decrees. They begin in the quiet, unobserved moments. A toddler pushing a teddy bear through a gap in the bars. A guard choosing to see a man instead of just an inmate. A victim finding the strength to demand something more meaningful than vengeance. These are the fragile threads that, when woven together, can sometimes mend a tear in the fabric of a life, or even challenge the rigid weave of an entire system. The story of Michael Thorne and Chloe Vance isn't about a magical cure. It's about a crack in a wall of silence, and what happens when light is allowed to pour through that crack. It asks us a difficult question. In a world that often reduces people to their worst mistakes or their most rigid roles, how do we make space for the possibility of change? How do we balance accountability with compassion, security with humanity? These aren't questions with easy answers, but they are questions worth sitting with. They are the reason we tell stories like this one, not because they are simple, but because they are necessary. They remind us that behind every headline, every court docket number, every uniform, there is a human heart, capable of great harm, yes, but also of incredible resilience and redemption. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of a moment when an unexpected connection changed your perspective, or if you simply believe in the power of these quiet, human narratives, then this channel is for you. We are dedicated to uncovering the deeper truths that lie beneath the surface of extraordinary events, to exploring the choices that define us, the connections that redeem us, and the stories that remind us of our shared humanity. We don't shout. We don't chase trends. We listen for the stories that are worth staying for, and we bring them to you with care and respect. Because in a noisy world, the quietest moments often speak the loudest. So if you want to join us in this space, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Become part of a community that values depth over distraction and meaning over hype. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about a time a small act of kindness changed your day, or what this story made you reflect on. And share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. And remember, the next story worth telling is always just around the corner. We'll see you there.